All right, so it's very nice to have you all here. This is Café Spurlos, part of Impact Hub Basel. Maybe you know Impact Hub Basel is the largest community that supports sustainable entrepreneurs. And in Switzerland, we're 6. In the world, it's more than 100. We've been in this place for about 2 years now, and we are also collaborating with education architects for this meetup. So this meetup is part of Digital Days, and we decided to do a joint event with the Tech and Humans meetup and the Edupreneurship meetup. So a very, very short introduction of what each one is. The Edupreneurship is a community of people coming or not from education background, but that try to get educational ideas as well out of the system, or to think out of the box in terms of education. And the Tech and Humans it's a meetup that started after the what was the name of the film? Social Dilemma. Yeah, thank you, Thea. And the plan was to just have a space where people can interact and talk about tech for good and the human part of technology. Well, okay, thank you. And we're going to start with, today we're talking about data collection in education and lifelong learning. And we have 3 wonderful speakers, Sally from Tracker Apps, and Andy and Peter from Hatsu. So I'm going to give the word to Sally, and she will introduce herself as well. Thank you.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you for the warm welcome, Anna Laura. My name is Sally Hirsch. I'm from Tracker Apps. I have to make a very quick confession for the Edupreneur meetup group. I'm a long-time lurker but I've never actually been to the meetup, so I will make it one day. But I'm always interested in seeing what the topics are and where you'll meet up. So I'm super excited that it actually exists. Because when I first moved to Basel, which was almost 2 years ago, I found it very hard to find this connection between education and entrepreneurship. So I'm very excited that this group exists, and I'm supporting you virtually, and I'll be there actually very soon. So you might be able to tell from my accent, I am Australian. I will say that I am not a software developer. I'm not a coder. I don't really consider myself an entrepreneur. I had a lot of difficulty when I walked in with this chart that Anna Laura's put up over there with the entrepreneurship, education and technology, like where to place myself. But I don't feel I'm at the entrepreneurship end, but I am an educator. I'm a teacher by training, and I like to solve problems. So I don't know, does that make me an entrepreneur, maybe? So I have been working in education for more than 20 years. I started teaching high school in Sydney and then moved to Switzerland. I worked in schools here in Switzerland, then in the US, where I also worked in universities. Malaysia, I was back in schools again, and that's where I started the company. So throughout that time, I've always loved technology. I've loved using it in the classroom. I've loved using it as a way to help my students engage with the material, manage their learning, and be really involved in the learning process. And as a teacher, of course, I love technology because it provides that extra little spark. But it's also, it became more and more apparent that technology can really do the heavy lifting of some of the data management for teachers. But unfortunately, what I was finding with technology is that it was really making a burden for the teachers. It was making us very much data entry people or data manipulation, but not necessarily able to use the data effectively to inform our teaching and learning. So when I was in the States and then in Malaysia, I became more involved with teacher training. And one of the questions I was always getting from teachers was, how can we use data more effectively in the classroom? And at that stage, I was working for the International Baccalaureate, which has curriculum programs for students from 3 years through to 18 years. They're in about 5,000 schools around the world, just over 1 million students. And they have a very heavy focus, or really at the core of their curriculum is skills and skill learning. They expect the schools to be able to track their student skill development. They expect there to be mapping of this. They expect the students to be able to talk about their skills and for teachers to be able to adapt and change their teaching based on student skill progression. So this is fantastic, and it all sounds very good in practice, but what it meant was for teachers, they had this huge challenge of how to manage skill development, how to manage it for students, how to track it. I saw all kinds of different methods. I saw teachers with skill books where they were writing down student observations. I saw students being able to record in these books or write reflections. I saw huge kind of spreadsheets tracking these skills. But all the time it seemed that this burden was on teachers. So this led me to thinking about, well, surely there's an app for that. That's the catchphrase, right? There's got to be an app for that. And I got together with a group of colleagues and we did some research. We realised that there wasn't, and this was an opportunity. So we developed our first product about 4 years ago called Skill Tracker, which was really designed for the students. This is where we started at with the student agency. And we thought we were doing something quite radical by having students input the data into this learning management system. If we can just go to the next slide, that would be great. Thank you. So this, thinking about learning management systems generally, on the left, this is very much what you'd see with a traditional learning management system. Are there any teachers in the room, by the way? Yeah, a few teachers. So you'll be very familiar with learning management systems, pulling all these different pieces of data together. When the software is developed, it's developed for an organisation, very much top down from the school. So a school or an organisation will buy it. They will then decide who has access to it, how the teachers use it. The teachers are doing the majority of the input. The students might do a little bit in terms of they might upload their assignments or they might record a reflection, but really all the data is being managed by the teachers. So we thought we were being very innovative and radical by developing a software system where the students were the ones that were putting the data in and the students were recording their skills and adding that evidence. And this was met with quite a lot of pushback always from schools. We had, of course, some schools that loved us and they very luckily became our customers, but I would always get that question from teachers as to, well, if the students are putting the data in, who's verifying it? As a teacher, how can I say that this is good or bad? And I would always reply, well, the student's chosen to record that evidence of their learning. And as a teacher, if you disagree with that, then that's a great opportunity for you to sit and have a face-to-face conversation with that student and come to a shared understanding. Because much as I love technology, I'm also very much believe in face-to-face interactions and having conversations and not just letting the data do the work for you. So this was our system that we developed. Much as we thought we were being innovative, we were really following this very traditional model. And then, of course, COVID hit and we had schools frantically scrambling for budgets. And we realised that we had to pivot. We had to change what we were doing. So we had this, more than a moment, but these months where we really wanted to reevaluate what we were doing as an organisation. We really believed in student autonomy, but we realised we weren't actually following through with our beliefs. Simply letting the students put the data in was not enough. So we thought, okay, what if we get even more radical? What if we decide that students should be able to track all of their learning, regardless of where it takes place or how it happens, where they go? What if the student is the first person that decides this is a learning moment, I'm going to record it, and this is going to form part of my learning journey? And one of my experiences really came to the fore here when I was a very new teacher. I went to a workshop. It was a very similar setting to this, actually. 2 days of, I can't even remember what the topic of the workshop was about, but I do remember Stan, who was the workshop leader, and before we'd even begun, he went and got an empty chair and he placed it in the middle of the room and he said, whatever we do today, I want you to remember this student. So we went through this exercise of giving this empty chair a persona of a student. We gave the student a name, we said what subjects they liked, what was their school bag, what did they do on the weekends. And whenever we had these discussions during the workshop, or we came to disagreements, or we couldn't decide a way forward, Stan would say, you've got to come back to the student. You've got to come back to the student. What decision are you making, and how is that going to impact their learning or help them learn better? So that was a moment that really resonated with me, and we really thought, okay, we've got to do something very different here. So I want to throw a question out to you all now. Just, have a moment to think, and I'd love to hear from you all. How do you know when you've learned something? How do you know?
I had a professor telling me that you know that you've learned something when you are capable of rephrasing it and trying to pass on the same knowledge while rephrasing it.
Okay, so teaching something. All right. Other ways? How do you know you've learned something?
When you get amazed.
Ah, okay. So that's something internal. Yeah. So something external, something internal. How else?
You can something transform, so you learn something and then you can use it in another situation, or
Yeah, so this skill of, that's one of it, going back to my skill chart, the transfer skill, that's one of the hardest things to learn, and that has the biggest impact, yeah.
I guess when my case is when I recognize applications of what I have learned, what is it applied to in the real world?
Aha, okay, thank you. Yeah, so you're able to, put something into action.
Context.
Yeah.
Context.
When you don't have to think about it and just do it, because you know it and you learn it.
Yeah, so the cognitive process is not step 1, step 2, step 3, you're not actually thinking, you're just doing it. Yeah, so it's a really interesting mix of internal and external things. Who has their driver's license? Yeah, that's a sign of you've learned something, you've got a little bit of paper, you know how to drive. Does that mean you're a Formula 1 driver? No. Well, depending on your self-belief of your driving skills, okay, maybe. All right, but it's a piece of paper, it's a recognition as much as a university degree or a certificate or that external where your professor was saying you can do this. So we've got these external ways of knowing we've learned, and then we've got those internal ways where you think, yes, I can do that. I can solve that problem. I've got that wow moment. I understand. I get it. And a lot of the long-lasting learning happens with that internal. That's that intrinsic motivation where you've solved that problem and you've got that satisfaction with yourself. So I wanted to keep that in mind as then we move to think about what could this look like in learning data. So our next slide. So these 3 big ideas. This circle here, this is our individual learner, again, always keeping our individual learner in place. The understanding that learning can happen anywhere. So we've got these very formal ways of learning, but we have lots of informal ways of learning that might happen in just an instant, or it might be 10 minutes, it might be something on the weekend, or maybe it's kind of in between. You've signed up for a volunteer program or a sports coaching course. I hear in Switzerland too, things like Fadi is a very successful way for helping young people learn all kinds of life skills. So all of these things are ways that can be learned, and they all help build up who we are as learners. And then the other word down there, agency. Student agency or student autonomy is a hot topic in education. Research shows that when there's high levels of student agency in a class, the students are much more likely to be motivated. And this steps away from these very old-fashioned or traditional ways of learning where students are, it was perceived that students were empty buckets and they would go to school to be filled up. And we know that that's not true. We know that students, regardless of what age they are, when they come into the classroom, they have prior experiences, prior knowledge, emotions, cultural backgrounds that all build and can be connected into what you're trying to teach them. And if you acknowledge those prior experiences and give them the agencies to take on those and connect them with new knowledge, you've got some very engaged and motivated learners. And then this aspect here of self-awareness, this is looking to that transition between formal learning and then into the workplace. And again, research shows that employees who have high levels of self-awareness are more likely to be productive, better communicators, more likely to have a growth mindset and be resilient. All of these things which help you become a happier or more content person. So if we want to join the dots between all our different types of learning, this high level of agency and this high level of self-awareness, we need to think about a product that could bring all these things together. And this is where we've started with our new development. So we have thought about the importance of the learner being in control. So they're the ones that are putting in the data, regardless of whether they're at school, they're at home, they move institutions or organisations, or they go into the workplace. So that's the first one, that the learner has to really be in the driving seat of what data goes in. Putting equal value on qualitative versus quantitative data. So yes, that university degree or that graduation certificate is important, but so are those learning experiences where you've had to be resilient or you've had to show your communication skills. Making sure the data can go with them, so this is very important, and this step away from the data being held by an organisation or a school. So the data here stays with the user no matter where they go. And then this ability to share. So this sort of overlaps into data privacy, and a lot of the conversations around data privacy are restricting access and making sure that the user has control over what they don't want shared. And I agree, but we have to have the other side of it as well, because we have to have the user choosing what they do want shared. If their school only shares data about how that student performed in a maths test, that's only one tiny data point. But the student might want to share more information about how they studied for that test, or how they prepared, maybe how they didn't do well, so how they'd like to progress and change their study habits based on that data. So allowing ways for students to share different parts of their learning is very important as well. I just want to conclude with this final quote, which I really loved. And it's from Kurt Bolliker, who's a data scientist out of San Francisco. And he said that data that is loved tends to survive. So what we're trying to create here is a way for students to love their data, to love looking at it, manipulating it, sharing it, interacting with it, to love the fact that their data is truly representative of them and their learning process, and how this will let them continue on their lifelong learning journey. Thank you.
Welcome everybody. It's a pleasure to be here at Impact Hub Basel. My first time here, and my first time in Basel for a long time. I'm originally from Valais, from the mountains, and but I've been all the way across the world, and now I'm back here. So yeah, in Basel of all places. But I think it's something that Steve Jobs already said. In life, sometimes you can only connect the dots when you look backwards, right? So we basically go through life, and lots of these things that happen, a little bit like what Sally also said, when you track your learning, while you go forward, you have these little pieces that you might track, but only when you look back later, you might start seeing a pattern, you might see a journey, and some of the things, some of the people you met, some of the experiences you had, they actually start making sense, right? And while we're actually in our lives as entrepreneurs, as educators, as technologists, or all of them together, we don't always realize that. Just out of curiosity, to maybe put you on that map a little bit, can you raise your hand if you are actually part of one of those fields? So who is more, or who has to do with education in the widest sense of the word? Yes? Okay. Who with entrepreneurship? Okay, good. And who with technology? Yeah. Who with technology mostly as a user? Okay. Who with technology mostly as a creator of technology? Okay. Yeah, you're certainly both, yeah. Okay, cool. So we start seeing that if we plot that graph, that's a lot of dots already, and maybe they already give us some sort of shape. But we see that the group and the collective wisdom that we probably have in this group here and in this room, that's why it's so cool to be in an impact hub, put that together and you could probably create something that might have an impact. And my life, it started in the mountains, so I was always in love with sports, with football. I was in love with helicopters and aviation. I was in love with computer devices, technology. So basically like most kids, right? Maybe with the difference that I still am a kid right now, and that's why mostly when people with kids meet me, they always say, oh, my kid really liked you. And I say, okay, it's maybe because they see me as one of them, right? So. And I think a lot of being an entrepreneur or also being maybe an inventor or somebody who tries to make things happen is really to keep that childlike wonder and to really go back and say, why does it have to be in this way and why can it not be in a different way? And in our everyday lives, everything else here is designed by people, right? And we have the right to rethink that, and we also have the right to reassemble this, right? This space today, I was given a little tour of this impact hub, and we were talking about circular economy and how many things here have been reused, right? So there's furniture that was already used. It looked a little bit like what my grandparents had, right? When they passed on, and we actually inherited their stuff and we reuse it, right? And I think it's this mindset of actually questioning what everybody else does differently that leads you to interesting places. And I want to show you a little bit where my life has led me to those funny places and why I'm back here now with you guys, and also how those images seem to not make sense if you look at them like this, but they might make more sense if we connect the dots. So I have a technical background, so I started probably being on the entrepreneurial edge of that graph there when I was 12, 13 years old, right? So here in Switzerland on Wednesday afternoons, you actually don't have to go to school, right? So I'm not sure if you all are familiar with that. So Wednesday afternoon is normally the time off of school, and every other day you basically have school from 8 in the morning till 4 o'clock, right? So every Wednesday afternoon as a 12, 13-year-old boy, I was actually going to my dad's office and I was using his computer. It was around the year 2000 and I was exploring the internet, right? Nowadays, probably everybody would say, oh my God, how could anybody let a kid just go and explore that internet? But luckily nobody knew that, so they just let me do it, right? And I was just exploring. And what happens when you're a kid, right? You don't just consume, you immediately want to imitate, right? So if an adult does something, what's the next thing that a kid is trying to do? They're trying to mimic and to replicate and to do the same thing. That's probably also how some of the most intrinsic and efficient learning happens, right? Is by imitation. We don't actually have to force people to learn things. We just do it and they imitate us anyway. So I was creating websites like everybody else on that internet. And I was 13, 14 when I first made my commercial websites for hotels and for companies. And so out of a hobby, like one of the things I saw in your map earlier, right? So school was here. It was just the thing I had to go to, right? When I wasn't playing football or skiing or other things. But then I had my hobby that was actually, nobody knew what it was called. It was just, what are you doing on this computer all Wednesday long? But this big love for creating things, for designing things, for creating things like magic out of nothing that before wasn't there, and actually fulfilling a need for people that actually had a desire to have a website or later maybe have an app on their phones. That's something that always had this really charming effect, right? And I think it's probably the sort of feeling that those of you who are in education get when they actually get to teach somebody something and see that something applied, right? So for me, that was mostly in this creation that I could see that. So then my journey took me to study computer science, then go to the United Kingdom, where I focused on games and AI. So I was probably one of the first people starting to look a little bit in that direction more than 10 years ago. Nowadays, everybody talks about machine learning and artificial intelligence. I was already interested in games and in also visual effects back then. So it landed me my first real job in London, where I was then creating software for Sony and Pixar, and basically software packages that were used to create a fake world, right? So when you're looking at every movie you see in the cinema, right, most of what is trying to be done there is to actually fake reality, right, as plausibly as possible. So even in computer games and games you play on your phones, we're not trying to recreate the world as accurately as possible. We're cheating in the cheapest way possible to make it look like, right? Because it's very expensive to simulate every atom and particle in this room, but it's a lot easier and quicker to just fake it and make it look like it is like that, right? So that has its own aspect of magic as well. So my journey took me also to Silicon Valley, because I got an offer one day to lead the software department of a company in the United States, and that was something where I could finally go to Silicon Valley, where normally all these entrepreneurial people, right? And I already kind of knew when I was 13, 14, I always wanted to be a little bit of an entrepreneur. I wanted to go there. And so when I got this offer over there, I didn't hesitate, and I started really diving into it. So long story short, I worked there, and at some point, I had this chance to build my own company. And it would have something to do with my hazu moment. Hazu is a word that in Japanese means the way it should be. I didn't know that because I never studied Japanese, but in Swiss German, there is, or in Valais German, like a rabbit is actually called a hazu. So when I was eating this chocolate rabbit and I was actually looking for a really cool name for my startup or for my idea, I was like, hazu, it was delicious. And I was like, okay, this could be a good name. So I Googled it, and I found out that it doesn't mean anything like perverted in another language or something. It actually means the way it should be. And I will explain in a second why that was the perfect fit for what I was actually building at the time, and what then became the company I founded, which to this very day is called Hazu, as you might see it everywhere. And almost nobody knows that story behind. So you're in a small elite group that know the origin story of that name. To everybody else, it's just the way it should be in Japanese. But let's skip back, and I was asked also by Georg to explain to the entrepreneurial-minded people what was the motivation, right, to found a company. And in a way, it kind of has to find you, right? So I wasn't getting up in the morning and saying, okay, I just found a company, now I just need an idea, right? Very often it's the other way around, right? You actually discover a certain problem or something that you might not like in the world, like Sally was saying as well. You identified that need, right? And then you see that there's a burning desire, and if nobody else is doing it, then probably you have to do it, right? And that was the same for me. So in my time in Silicon Valley, I was really exposed to this, so to speak, fragmented analog world. So I saw that a lot of people there, and this is pretty much the same, it looks almost until today, they were living a digital world that was mostly based on old analog concepts. So what do I mean by that, right? If I look at Word, this is basically like the paper sheet, like the A4 sheet that we have. Then people make a PDF of that, and they put it maybe in a file or in a folder on Dropbox or Google Drive or OneDrive, right? So you're basically taking an analog concept like a folder where you normally put on the shelf, and you make it in the digital world. Then you send it maybe via email, and email is electronic mail. So it's the post office again, right? So we're using all of these metaphors to actually represent a world that today happens on devices like this, or this, or this, or even a virtual reality headset. It's not something that happens on an A4 paper in a folder or in your inbox, right? And I usually ask people, so who of you has visited the post office in the last 7 days? Okay, you had to probably for some reason, or was it? Exactly, but it wasn't out of your free will and because you, yeah, okay, yeah. And it's the same, who last took a document and put it in a folder and then put that folder somewhere on the shelf? Who did it in the last 7 days? You had to? Yeah, but why was that?
Because I had to sort all the bills I still receive.
Exactly, yeah. It's all the things we want to get away from most of the time, right? I'm not saying that this is stupid or this is old, but it's generally speaking what people want to move away from when they talk about the digital world and all the promises of the good things of these devices, right? Let's not talk about all the negative side effects, but at least we have to make sure we use the positive side, so at least there's a balance between also all the other potential risks that those devices can show us, right? So my point was, why can't this be all one world, filled up with snow, so we don't have the risk, right, to fall into those cracks and actually say, I have to choose what I want to do and in what program I want to do it before I create it, right? So I can't just start with an idea, with a project, with a lesson, with a task. With my idea, I have to start with, okay, is this actually a Word file or is it going to be a presentation, right? So my thinking can actually not actually go in all directions. I have to choose the logic of the application I want to use. And if I start a new project, most people, they start with creating a WhatsApp group for the 5 of us, creating a OneDrive, then having maybe Microsoft Teams, then having a Slack channel, maybe forwarding some email addresses, having a website somewhere, a calendar tool, and maybe another tool to video conference, right? So you start off with 20 different islands before your first thought of creativity can even start, right? And then those thoughts, they always have to jump between, and sometimes actually they go lost, right? They go lost in translation because, oh, I haven't received the email link from the calendar invite to the Skype call, right, over whatever, and then you're lost. So yeah, anyway, I was trying to think of a world of how I would build that, or how somebody would build that if they didn't know anything. So if you are a child, or if you're an alien and you come to this world, and for the very first time you land here, you wouldn't know what a floppy disk is, right? You wouldn't know, I click a floppy disk, and a floppy disk means save an A4 paper to a folder, and then I make a PDF that I send via the post office equivalent to my teacher, and then my teacher maybe prints it out, corrects it, scans it in, and it sends it back, or whatever. Even if it sounds funny, but most of these steps are things that people actually do like that, right? I was saying, why can't it all just be information, like visually, evolutionary, we're actually used to visual information. We're used to shapes and sizes and colors. And these are actually much, much older in our evolutionary development than, let's say, text or the printing press. Most of these things, they came later, right? And so why can't we structure the whole world in a way that I can start with putting down a thought or an idea or a to-do, and I put down another one, and I put down a third one. But then if I want to rearrange this and say, boom, make this a slide, like I did here, it can be a slide. If I want them to be listed in a list like this, it can be a list. If I want to say this is something that has a date, because it's like a to-do or it has a delivery date, I can add a date to that, and now I can display that on my calendar. Or if I have a location and say this is San Francisco, this is Basel, and this is Visp, I can actually display them on a globe or on a Google map, right? So you see, your information is only represented once. You can start off with this being a list of topics that you're going to talk about today to your students, but by adding some more information, or even a person maybe that you assign as responsible, you can basically manage that whole life cycle, right? And so let me see, I hope this video works here. I want to show you a little short video of how our approach looks like, how our product looks like, and how this can actually be used in all of these different contexts. Way it should be. And then it made sense again why I ate that chocolate rabbit that one day. Yeah. So you see that even this presentation, by the way, see, this is not a slideshow. Most of you probably until this point thought, oh, that's a PowerPoint or a Google presentation. It's not, right? It's just a list of items that by basically changing the view here, I can go into presentation, and now I can show these as slides. Or I could probably also print them, and now I have just a really, really stylish document that I didn't actually have to format. It actually takes the shape that I need. I could also display it in other views, right, to say, okay, let's sort this by the different columns, right? So all the ones with that color here, that color there, that color there. Maybe I'm not connected now. But you see how it's very versatile, right? And I start off with putting down the ideas that I have about my presentation, and now it really takes the shape of what I want it to be. And you see these elements here, a little bit like those. It's always the same element. I don't have to recreate it in a different island. And those things have actually revolutionized quite a few organizations that work like that. So we have customers in the education sector that have completely new school models that can be created like that. Until now, they were limited by the tools, because the tools were actually working for a very old school system that wasn't very project-based, that wasn't very intrinsically motivated, right? So all of their tools were made to look like that and to abstract that reality, the same way the tools were made to abstract the A4 paper and the post office. Whereas now they can work with that and they can say, what's my logic, right? How does my mind map of my school or of my project actually look like? And even entire teaching aids and books by large publishers have been created entirely on that platform, right? Including videos, including audio, images, even virtual reality content that's built into the platform. In sports, we have similar things where organizations are actually recreating the way they communicate with their athletes and also with their youth. And similar things in aviation and with the Swiss government. So do I still have time? 5 minutes? Yes?
I think so.
Yes.
Or maybe we can go into discussion and then you can...
Yes, exactly. I just wanted to finish off with the actual analytics part, because the question, or one of the questions that was in the brief of this event was really to ask, so what data do we track, right? What data from the users do we get, and what do we do with that data? But I wanted to take a little bit more time to first explain why we think that data first needs to be in a format where you can actually then use that data, right? Because by just knowing that you have 5,000 Word files somewhere in your folder structure on your OneDrive or on your Microsoft Teams account, that doesn't really give you that much analytics, right? It makes it very hard for you to get smarter and to actually benefit. And so in our case, we get some analytics from the way people use our platform, right? This is something that you can see platforms like ours, we are using to understand how many users do we have a month, how many pages does every user look at. So we see that every one of those on average actually navigates into 8 different places in one session, and on average are visiting the platform for 7 minutes. All of that data is anonymized, so none of those tracking data is personal. We don't know which user was doing that. We use this anonymized analytics output to basically understand where we might lose users, where we might make the experience better so they don't bounce or they don't come to a site and then go somewhere else.
What does it mean by bounce?
Bouncing means a visitor comes to your site and without clicking to a second or third place, they leave it immediately, right? 28%, depending on what your site is not very high, because sometimes a person really just comes, gets an information, and then they leave again, right? So it's not always achievable that this is super, super low. And you saw already in the examples before, we have a lot of different customers, right? Some are governments, some are aviation companies, and some are schools, and not all of them use our platform the same way, right? So that's something where if we wanted to have even better analytics, we could start trying to group those numbers a little bit and say, our users in this field, they have those numbers, and our users in education, they might have a different number because they use the platform completely differently. So this is just for you to see, but not every company does it the same way. And for us, it's really important in our business model that the data belongs to the customer, a little bit like what Sally said, right? People put in the data that they want, that is relevant to them, and it's not about us spying on them or tracking them. It's for us to help them represent their data, their slides, their content, and their learning better, so they get smarter first. They can actually visualize that and understand that data, and only as a secondary thing, with artificial intelligence or machine learning, actually provide interfaces to partners and them to actually get even more insights on their learning progress. And yeah, this is connected to this part here. So I think this is probably good to open the round as well for questions, because this is something that it really depends what you're interested in. I can talk about all of these topics. Okay, let me see what else I had. Yeah, just to come back to the connecting of the dots, you saw our whole concept is built around connecting these dots and allowing people to connect the dots for them in their world and in their concept. And I hope that maybe for some of you, if you find something that for you is Hazu, the way it should be in your field, that you have the courage to found a company or to create a project or initiative, and if you work hard, you'll also have really good people join you. Like I had Peter Metzger, who is joining our company and really supporting me on the business side to get those ideas and that technological side actually implemented and put into the real world. And when you then look back, it all makes sense. You can connect the dots, and that's how I got here today.